What if desire wasn't what you imagine? What if behind seduction, passion, and the promise of pleasure, there was always a shadow of power, manipulation, and pain? Nietzsche believed that desire is not a divine gift, nor a path to purity, but rather a restless, animal, and inevitably cruel force. He didn't write to soften our illusions, but to tear them out by their roots. Desire is born from lack, but also from potency. It moves us, but never completely satisfies us. Therefore, each conquest brings with it a greater emptiness, a new dissatisfaction, a new wound, and yet we cannot escape it. Perhaps most disturbing is recognizing that desire doesn't seek just connection, but domination. In love, in friendship, at work, even in spirituality, it infiltrates as a motor of appropriation. If desire is inevitable, the question is, how to transform it? Nietzsche invites us to look without veils, to perceive what really pulses within us. It's a painful but liberating journey. If this reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey through the darker and truer side of the human soul. Nietzsche never had patience for easy explanations about what moves the human being. For him, desire is not an ornament of life, something that arises only in romantic situations or emotional neediness. Desire is, in fact, the very foundation of existence. Even before we formulate rational thoughts, we are already taken by forces that push us toward the world, that make us want, fight, seek. Desire is life's first motor, the spark that pulls us from inertia. Contrary to what Western philosophical tradition often tried to teach, we are not born inclined toward balance or serenity. We are born in lack. We are born with an open wound. The body asks for food, the mind asks for meaning, the heart asks for company. It is in this emptiness that desire rises as an instinct. But Nietzsche goes beyond. It's not just about deficiency, but about potency. Desire is also excess energy, a force that needs to expand, that cannot bear to be contained. When we feel desire, it's as if life screams inside us that it wants more, always more. Imagine a baby who cries. He doesn't know how to speak, doesn't know how to think, but already knows how to want. The cry is desire's first scream, the announcement that life doesn't suffice alone, that it wants to suck, swallow, possess. This initial movement never abandons us, it only changes form. We grow up, learn to name, to negotiate, to disguise, but we remain the same, beings who desire without ceasing. Nietzsche ironized the idea that desire would be something noble, elevated, a ladder to the divine. For him, desire is earthly, animal, visceral. When a man desires a woman or a woman desires a man, there's nothing pure in this impulse. There's a mixture of hunger, of power, of instinct. There's the same movement that makes the lion run after prey. There's no transcendence, there's flesh. This may sound brutal, but it's precisely this brutality that Nietzsche wants us to face. At the same time, desire is never just biological necessity, it is also imagination. We desire what we invent, what we idealize. The other is not just the other, it's the mirror of our deficiencies, the promise of our completeness. That's why desire never fully realizes itself. There's always a remainder, an unfilled space, an absence that keeps pulsing. Thus, desire is interminable movement, a search that never ends. Deep down, Nietzsche invites us to perceive that desire is ambiguous from its origin. It is born from lack, but also from excess. It is animal, but also creator of illusions. It puts us in contact with the rawest reality of our body, but also drags us to fantasies that never come true. It's this mixture that makes desire so powerful and so cruel. Think about daily life. When we desire something, a body, an object, a social position, we're not just seeking that thing itself. We desire the power that comes with it, the sensation of victory, the confirmation that we are strong, beautiful, recognized. We desire not just the other, but also the image of ourselves that desire promises. It's at this point that Nietzsche shows his deepest vision. Desire is, from the beginning, will to power. It's not enough to have. One must feel greater, expanded, affirmed. This is desire's cruel anatomy. It moves us but deceives us. It feeds us but empties us. It pushes us toward the world but always leaves us unsatisfied. In desire's birth is already inscribed the impossibility of its full realization. We are creatures who can never stop wanting, and perhaps it's precisely this that defines us as humans. Nietzsche doesn't propose denying this impulse. On the contrary, he calls us to recognize its force and its ambiguity. Pretending that desire is pure love or pure deficiency is living in lies. The truth is that from the first cry to the last sigh, we are traversed by this restless energy that doesn't ask permission, that doesn't respect limits, that simply imposes itself. And if we have the courage to look at this beginning without illusions, perhaps we can learn to live better with desire instead of being enslaved by it. Nietzsche had a rare ability, stripping away the disguises of what human beings insist on idealizing. Desire, for him, never presents itself naked. It always appears covered by veils, narrated in beautiful stories, protected by discourses of purity and love. But behind each sweet word, each promise of surrender, there exists something else, the will to possess, to dominate, to affirm oneself over the other. Desire wears a mask so that we can bear it, and perhaps so that we can deceive ourselves. When we say, "I love you," many times what we're expressing is, "I want to have you." Romantic love functions as an ornament that hides desire's rawest movement. Culture transformed this impulse into something acceptable, into an ideal to be sought, into a myth of completeness. But Nietzsche invites us to listen to what lies behind the word, and what we find is less a pure sentiment than an attempt at appropriation. To love deep down can mean, "I want you to be mine, I want you to confirm me, I want you to serve me." Desire's disguise is present not only in love, but in all spheres of life. When we seek recognition at work, when we fight for prestige, when we dedicate ourselves to a project that seems noble, how many times are we not, in truth, desiring power? What we call vocation may be just a mask for vanity. What we call altruism may be just a way to feed the ego. Nietzsche saw in this not a moral failure, but a revelation of the human condition itself. We create stories to make bearable the truth that behind everything we are animals who want to win, conquer, expand. Desire masks itself because we cannot bear to face its brutality. If someone said openly, "I want you to satisfy my instinct for power," the phrase would sound unbearable. It's more comfortable to hear, "I want to be by your side because you complete me." Language creates perfumes that disguise flesh's raw smell. But Nietzsche insisted, it's not about eliminating the perfumes, but about recognizing that they are perfumes, that we shouldn't confuse them with essence. In daily life, it's easy to perceive these masks coming unstuck. A couple that says they live for love falls apart in fights over jealousy, control, silent disputes. A professional who speaks of passion for career shows himself obsessed with status, salary, colleagues' admiration. A person who dedicates himself to helping others reveals in moments of fragility that he also seeks to be seen, recognized, praised. Desire is never innocent. It infiltrates like a shadow in each gesture, and what we show the world is only the acceptable version of this shadow. Nietzsche saw in this a form of necessary self-deception. After all, how could we live if we had to admit at every moment that we love only to possess, that we help only to magnify our ego, that we work only to beat others? Life would be unbearable if this nakedness were exposed in every detail. Masks, in this sense, are not just social deception, but also survival mechanism. They allow us to coexist, to create, to not drown in instinct's rawness. But recognizing the mask is different from destroying it. Nietzsche doesn't preach that we should tear off all veils and live in brutal transparency. What he proposes is consciousness. The problem is not wearing masks, but believing that they are the face itself. When we believe that love is pure surrender, we fall into the illusion that makes us prey to desire. When we perceive that love is also appropriation and power, we begin to relate differently, less naive, less idealized, perhaps more painful, but also truer. There's a cruelty in this perception. How many of us wouldn't like to believe that love is really pure, that desire is a sign of elevated soul, that we seek the other only for spiritual connection? Nietzsche tears this hope and says, no, you desire because you want to possess, want to dominate, want to feel stronger. But this cruelty is not gratuitous destruction. It's a call to maturity. Whoever has courage to see desire without mask discovers a path of freedom. Imagine a relationship in which both parties recognize, in silence, that desire is never innocent, that they admit there's a power game, that there's possessive instinct, that there's inflated ego. This couple doesn't live on fragile illusions, but on a consciousness that can even strengthen the relationship. For instead of falling into disappointment when the mask comes off, they already know from the beginning what they face. Nietzsche asks us exactly this: courage to look behind the veils, not to live without masks, but to not be slaves of them. When we see desire's cruelty disguised, we have the chance to create more authentic relations, more lucid choices, freer paths. And perhaps the question that remains is this: how many of your choices, your loves, your dreams are really yours? And how many are just masks you learn to wear to avoid facing the truth of what you desire? Nietzsche saw desire as a force that never comes isolated. Where there's pleasure, there's also pain. Where there's conquest, there's also frustration. There's no joy in wanting without the shadow of suffering that accompanies it. This is perhaps one of the most uncomfortable truths about desire. It never comes alone. Its promise of ecstasy carries with it the condemnation of dissatisfaction. When we desire something or someone, we create tension within ourselves. Body and mind inflame, imagine, anticipate. This movement is already painful because it exposes lack, shows the absence of what we don't yet have. It's like an open wound that will only be closed when we reach the desired object. But paradoxically, when we finally achieve it, satisfaction is fleeting. In little time, emptiness returns, and a new desire takes its place. Thus, desire drags us in an interminable cycle of deficiency and relief, pleasure and pain. Nietzsche knew that many philosophical and religious traditions tried to solve this dilemma by proposing renunciation. If desire brings pain, it would be better to eliminate it. But he rejected this solution. For Nietzsche, desire is not an error but the very expression of life. Removing desire would be the same as removing vital energy. The pain it causes is not a sign of corruption, but an inevitable part of the process of living. Pleasure is only intense because it's linked to pain. They are inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. Think of an everyday example: passion. When someone falls in love, they experience immense pleasure in the other's presence. Each look, each gesture, each word seems to carry an intensity that transforms the world. But along with this pleasure also comes anguish. The fear of losing, the anxiety of not being reciprocated, the insecurity about the future. The same flame that warms is the one that burns. Desire's pleasure is inseparable from the pain that sustains it. Nietzsche saw in this movement an expression of the will to power. To desire is to expose oneself to risk, is to put oneself vulnerable, is to launch oneself outside of oneself. This leap is not comfortable, is not serene, but is necessary. True pleasure doesn't exist without crossing through pain. That's why every conquest, however glorious, always has the bittersweet taste of dissatisfaction. It's not failure, it's structure. The human being is made of tensions, not artificial harmonies. There is, however, a crucial detail. Desire's suffering can imprison us or transform us. When we believe that pain is a sign of error, we fall into resentment. We begin to deny desire, to fear life, to seek anesthesia. But when we recognize that pain is part of the game, we can cross through it differently, not as victims, but as creators. Pain, in this sense, stops being enemy and becomes fuel. Nietzsche compared life to a rope stretched over the abyss. To live is to be constantly in imbalance, exposed, vulnerable. Desire is the force that keeps us on this rope, but also the one that threatens to knock us down. Pleasure is feeling the wind on our face, the vertigo of height. Pain is perceiving the fall always possible. You can't separate one from the other. What we can do is learn to dance on the rope, accept vertigo as part of the experience. In daily life, we see this clearly. Whoever desires a successful career needs to endure frustrations, rejections, failures. Whoever desires to create a work of art needs to cross through the pain of discipline, of criticism, of incompleteness. Whoever desires to love needs to face the pain of jealousy, of loss, of imperfection. Pleasure is never pure because it always comes marked by the suffering that accompanies it. But it's precisely this mixture that gives depth to experiences. Nietzsche invites us to a change of perspective. Instead of asking how to eliminate desire's pain, we should ask how to make it bearable, even necessary. Pleasure, when isolated from pain, becomes shallow, fragile, ephemeral. But when we accept pain as part of the process, we discover greater intensity, a vitality that doesn't let itself be shaken by inevitable suffering. This vision is hard, but liberating. For if desire always carries pain, there's no reason to blame ourselves for suffering. Suffering is part of desiring, and desiring is part of living. What we need is to abandon the illusion that one day we'll achieve pleasure without pain, conquest without frustration, love without loss. This promise never fulfills itself. What we can achieve is something else, the strength to affirm desire, even knowing its cruelty. And it's here that Nietzsche offers us a key to transformation. It's not about fleeing the cycle, but about dancing within it, about recognizing that pleasure and pain are accomplices, that we don't need to choose between one and the other, but accept the paradox. The greater the desire, the greater the pain, but also the greater the life that pulses in us. Nietzsche believed that desire is not just a search for pleasure, but deep down, a manifestation of what he called will to power. To desire is to want more than satisfaction. It's to want to expand, affirm oneself, exercise force over the world and over others. Desire doesn't limit itself to filling a lack. It's a movement of conquest. And it's at this point that its cruel nature appears with greater sharpness. From childhood, we learn to camouflage this impulse. When a child cries because he wants a toy, he's not just asking for an object. He's wanting to affirm his dominion over space, over parents, over the attention he receives. The toy is symbol, but desire is for power. This logic doesn't disappear in adult life. It just refines itself. The adult who desires recognition at work, who desires to be loved, who desires respect, is also seeking to affirm his position before others. Desire is the way life projects itself outside of itself, trying to expand its territory. Nietzsche saw this clearly when speaking of love. For him, to love is almost never just an experience of giving. To love is to want to possess, is to want to mold the other according to our necessities, is to desire that the loved person belong to us. It's an impulse of power disguised as tenderness. Jealousy, so present in relationships, reveals this background. We can't stand the idea that the other is free, because deep down, we desire that he be ours. Thus, love shows the face of will to power masked. This movement is not only negative. To desire power doesn't mean only to manipulate or dominate, but also to create, transform, affirm. When an artist desires to realize a work, he doesn't seek only personal expression, but also to exercise force over the world, leave a mark, impose his vision. When someone desires to deeply understand an idea, he doesn't seek only neutral knowledge, but also to amplify his own capacity to interpret, to intellectually dominate reality. The desire for power is present in each gesture of life. Nietzsche ironized the philosophies and religions that tried to deny this impulse. He saw in them an attempt to disguise the will to power under the name of humility, renunciation, or obedience. But for him, even in these cases, the desire for power continued active. The monk who retreats from the world and affirms that he gave up everything, deep down, desires spiritual power, desires the position of purity, desires moral superiority. The desire for power infiltrates even gestures of denial. In daily life, we can observe this clearly. When someone helps another person, there is, yes, compassion, but there's also a desire to be useful, to be recognized, to feel important. When someone dedicates himself to caring for family, there's affection, but also the will to organize, to direct, to maintain under control. Desire in any sphere is never neutral. It always seeks to expand, conquer, mold. Nietzsche didn't see in this a condemnation. He didn't say, therefore we are all egoists and manipulators. What he wanted was for us to face this truth without veils. The desire for power is inevitable because life is, in itself, expansion. The problem is not having this impulse, but living in the illusion that it doesn't exist. When we believe we desire only for the other's good or only for purity, we fall into deception. When we recognize that our desire is also desire for power, we can act with more consciousness and responsibility. This consciousness, however, is painful. It's much easier to believe that we love only for love, that we help only for altruism, that we create only for inspiration. Nietzsche forces us to look beyond the surface and perceive the machinery that moves our actions. It's as if he said, you don't love only for the other, you love because you want to possess him. You don't create only for beauty, you create because you want to leave your mark. You don't help only for goodness, you help because you want to feel strong. This vision disturbs, but also liberates. For by accepting desire as will to power, we stop being naive and begin to be conscious creators. We can choose how to exercise this force, in a destructive, manipulative, small way, or in an expansive, creative, transformative way. The desire for power can generate wars and violence, but can also generate works of art, scientific discoveries, profound relations. It's not desire itself that is good or bad, but the way we cultivate it. Nietzsche invites us then to ask, in what way do we exercise our desire for power? Are we only masking our deficiencies with beautiful discourses, or are we really transforming this force into creation? Recognizing desire's cruelty is not losing hope, but assuming responsibility for dealing with it head-on. And perhaps the great revelation is this: there's no desire without power. To love, create, work, help, everything is, deep down, expression of a force that wants to expand. The challenge is not to deny this movement, but to learn to do it lucidly, intensely, and creatively. Nietzsche profoundly distrusted what we call romantic love. For him, this idea was nothing but a cultural invention, a beautiful mask that hides desire's raw reality and the will to possess. Romantic love, with its promise of completeness, of soulmate, of perfect union, is not ultimately a spiritual encounter. It's a necessary illusion, a myth created to give meaning to what, deep down, is appropriation, vanity, and fear of being alone. He perceived that love, as we idealize it, feeds on deception. When someone says, "You are everything I need," what in truth he's saying is, "You are the way I hide my emptiness, the way I try not to face my solitude." Romantic love makes us believe that the other is the answer, but in the Nietzschean vision, this belief is just a strategy to make life's inevitable incompleteness bearable. Nietzsche provoked, "To love is not to surrender purely. To love is to want to possess, is to want the other to become part of our territory." Jealousy, so common in loving relations, is proof of this background of possession. When we say we're afraid of losing who we love, what we feel is not just pain for absence. It's also rage for the loss of what we considered ours. Love, therefore, carries within it the desire for dominion, and the romantic myth tries to hide this uncomfortable truth. In daily life, we see this illusion unfolding in countless forms. Couples who say they live unconditional love often suffocate themselves in rules, demands, and requirements. The phrase, "If you love me, you'll do this for me," clearly reveals the dynamic of power disguised as affection. Romantic love, instead of liberating, frequently imprisons. It creates unreal expectations, demands perfection, promises eternity, and by not fulfilling, generates resentment. Nietzsche invites us to question, do we really love the other, or do we love the image of ourselves reflected in his gaze? How many times do we not seek in love more the confirmation of our value than the other's authentic existence? We want to be desired because this feeds our ego. We want to be chosen because this gives us the sensation of victory. We want to be loved because this frees us for an instant from solitude's anguish. The other becomes means, not end. But Nietzsche wasn't content to just denounce. His criticism was not an invitation to cynicism or giving up on love. On the contrary, it was a call to live love without illusions. To love without the romantic myth means accepting that the other doesn't complete us, that there's no perfection, that the relation will always be crossed by tensions, power games, and fragilities. It means abandoning the expectation of fusion and beginning to see love as encounter of forces, as dance of potencies that can both enrich and wound each other. This vision is hard, because it dismantles the fantasy that so many carry from childhood. Stories, films, poems taught us to believe that there exists a lost half that will make us whole. Nietzsche pulls us from this belief and says, "You were already born incomplete and will continue incomplete." Love is not cure for this. It can be, yes, life's intensification, but never salvation. However, in this deconstruction, there's also liberation. When we stop expecting love to be a fairy tale, we begin to live more real relations. We begin to see the other as he is, not as projection of our desires. We discover that to love is not to idealize, but to coexist with difference, with imperfection, with instability. This form of love is less romantic, but more mature. It's a love that doesn't sustain itself on fragile illusions, but on the consciousness that two desiring beings meet, and that this encounter is always risky, always imperfect, always alive. Nietzsche believed that living without the myth of romantic love requires courage. It's much easier to lean on the fantasy of the soulmate than to face the truth that the other will never be totally ours, that desire never satisfies itself fully, that to love is also to lose. But by facing this truth, we gain something greater, the possibility of loving affirmatively without resentment, without expecting more than life can give. Thus, the great question that Nietzsche poses is, Do you love reality or do you love illusion? Are you willing to live love as encounter of imperfect forces, or do you prefer to continue believing in stories that sooner or later fall apart? Recognizing romantic love's illusion doesn't mean abandoning love, but liberating it from myth's chains. Only thus can we love without masks, more freely, more creatively, more truly. Nietzsche never preached desire's elimination. For him, this would be the same as amputating life itself. Desire is vital force, energy that moves us, flame that keeps existence burning. But if it's true that desire is cruel, insatiable and masked, how can we deal with it without being dragged by its tyranny? It's here that the possibility of transcendence arises, not in the sense of denying it, as certain religions or philosophies do, but of transforming it into creation, into potency, into life's affirmation. Nietzsche distrusted those traditions that said, "Renounce desire and you'll find peace." For him, this peace was nothing but anesthesia, escape, denial of vitality itself. It's not about killing desire, but about learning to dance with it, to put it at life's service instead of being enslaved by its craving. To transcend desire is to recognize its cruel nature and still transform it into motor of something greater. Think about how desire can be redirected. The artist who transforms lack into work, the thinker who transforms restlessness into idea, the lover who, instead of imprisoning the other, learns to enrich himself in encounter. Desire, when it's not just possession, can be source of creation. Nietzsche saw in this movement the possibility of overcoming the condition of desire's servant and becoming creator of new values. This process requires lucidity. While we believe that desire will lead us to completeness, we'll be condemned to frustration. But when we accept that it never satisfies itself totally, we can stop seeking happy endings and begin to live intensities. Desire stops being promise of plenitude and becomes experience of force. It's not about getting there, but about dancing in the middle of the path. In daily life, this means a radical change of posture. When desiring someone, instead of believing that this love will be eternal and perfect, we recognize that it will be imperfect, but still worthy of being lived. When desiring an objective, instead of imagining that, by achieving it, everything will resolve, we know that soon another will arise, and even so we continue, because value is not in the end, but in movement. To transcend desire is to learn to savor tension and not just the goal. Nietzsche proposes, therefore, an ethics of creation, using desire as fuel to expand life and not as chain that binds us to illusions. Desire can drag us down when it makes us dependent, resentful, enslaved, but it can also elevate us when it becomes impulse to create, to overcome, to affirm. The same fire that consumes can also illuminate. This transformation requires courage. It's much easier to remain in illusion's comfort, believing that the next love, the next success, the next object will finally fulfill us. But Nietzsche insists that day will never come. Desire is an infinite cycle. Greatness lies in accepting it as such and from there, deciding what to do with it. Live as prisoner, running after mirages, or live as creator, using desire's fire to give form to the world. This is the difference between the common man and the creator, between what Nietzsche calls herd and free spirit. The first lives running after desire, like one who pursues a carrot hung in front of a horse, always believing that, in the next step, completeness will come. The second accepts that the carrot will never be reached, and instead of despairing, transforms the run into dance. Lives not for the promise of the end, but for the intensity of the path. And here we arrive at the decisive point. To transcend desire doesn't mean conquering it, but affirming it. Accepting its cruelty, its insatiability, its nature of mask, and from this choosing to use it as instrument of creation. creating works, creating freer relations, creating oneself. It's the movement of eternal return, desiring even knowing that desire never resolves. It's having strength to say yes to the cycle, yes to pain, yes to lack, because it's this that keeps life pulsing. Nietzsche doesn't promise consolation, but a kind of tragic greatness. Life won't give us plenitude, but offers us the chance to create from incompleteness. Desire will never give us peace, but can give us intensity. And perhaps in the end, isn't this what we seek? Not perfection, but the experience of being alive in its most vibrant form. To transcend desire is precisely this. Stop expecting from it what it cannot give, and begin to use it as it really is, an indomitable, cruel, and creative force. And when we manage to make this leap, we don't eliminate desire, but learn to dance with it. We reach the end of this journey through desire's cruel anatomy. Throughout the chapters, we saw how Nietzsche dismantles our most intimate illusions. Desire is not innocent, is not pure, is not salvation. It's born from lack, but also from excess. It wears masks of love and altruism, but keeps in its nucleus the will to power. It mixes pleasure and pain inseparably. It creates romantic love's illusion, only to reveal that deep down, we want to possess more than surrender. And finally, we learned that we don't need to deny desire. We need to transform it into creation, into force that expands life, into dance before its inevitable cruelty. Nietzsche doesn't offer us comfort, but courage. He asks us to abandon easy fantasies and face naked truth. To desire is to suffer, to desire is to dominate, to desire is never to be complete. But it's precisely in this incompleteness that we find the possibility of living with more intensity, more lucidity, and more freedom. And now the question that remains for you: what was the belief about love and desire that most imprisoned you until today? Share your reflection in the comments. Also, tell us where you're watching from. It's always inspiring to see how far this philosophical community extends. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring together the depths of the human soul. Thank you so much for being here. Your presence shows that philosophy is not just distant theory, but a living path of self-knowledge and transformation. Until the next journey.